Yeah,
I hope
tell
that,
me about catalysts.
no, well, I mean, just to say, I hope what you're describing is that feeling of restlessness. I think it is really catching on
Yeah,
in a pretty big way.
yeah.
And linked to the title of your show, which I think is a great title, California Times, that, like, who's saying the times they are a changing.
Correct.
And I think what we're witnessing is that there has been such a false narrative that has been promoted about housing, with kind of a Chicken Little theme of the sky is falling, the sky is falling, it's a crisis.
Hmm.
And using that refrain from a let's pretend storybook to convince so many people that it is worthwhile to undermine democratic principles of locally elected officials making decisions on behalf of the people who elected them. And that's being reneged upon and erased with this Chicken Little, the sky is falling narrative, so that all kinds of things are going on in California Times in this time,
Mhm.
which to me, the crisis is not the housing crisis. We have problems in affordable housing. Yes, totally agree with that. But the crisis is that what we're witnessing is the undermining of democracy and taking away those rights and access to dreams that people have about owning a home and a backyard and just home as a quality, and replacing that with, we'll have regional agencies and state mandates dictating what should be happening in our communities with little regard for what people want in their neighborhoods, because there's a whole lot more profit, to be made if the builders get the keys to our cities and to the decision making that we have been able to count on locally elected officials in conversation with local people to plan what's best for our cities.
That could be occupied by 3 different families potentially. And not only that, but they didn't have to include any kind of parking for the people that would live there for on-property parking. And so people would either have to not have cars or have to park their cars on the street. Well, we as a city objected to that, and we thought that that was wrong, but we didn't have a choice. We could not, it's state law. We have to follow the law. So we had to change our laws to reflect that. And so we as a council just shook our heads saying, well, what can we do to stop this? And we all said, well, really, there's not much. We've done everything we thought we could, and that was to file letters of protest and letters of opposition to these bills, which were basically ignored. And so it dawned on me to say, the public doesn't know about this, but we as the leaders of our communities, our cities, our elected officials, council members and mayors, we do know what's going on because we're in the process of having to modify our housing ordinances to reflect these state laws. And so I came up with the idea, and this is how California Cities for Local Control was founded, was to reach out to all the elected officials in all cities across the whole state of California to identify other council members who felt the same way as we did in Torrance, who felt like the state was overreaching in their authority to dictate or mandate how we would handle our housing, our land use, and our zoning issues in our own communities. And I thought, well, this is because the city officials kind of have a better feeling of what's going on than the public. I thought that if we could unite all the city officials who feel the same way in a single voice under the guise of our group called California Cities for Local Control, that maybe we would be able to have a stronger voice in Sacramento in lobbying the state legislators to not pass bills like this. Because what we feel, and this is where the local control piece comes out, is that we feel that the cities should be controlling that. These types of decisions should be made at the local level, not at the state level, because you know what, the Sacramento politicians that are up there making some of these laws, most of them have never set foot in our city. They have no idea what our city is like. They don't have any idea how much effort and time went into planning our communities, our neighborhoods, to design a community that we thought would be appropriate for where we are in the city and what the people of our community want.
I, along with several other neighbors, founded United Homeowners Association back in 2016. And we founded it as a 501c4 nonprofit mutual benefit corporation to advocate for the best interests of residents of Windsor Hills, View Park, and View Heights. Those are unincorporated communities, really just across the LA City County line. We're centrally located in pretty much in Baldwin Hills. If folks are familiar with Los Angeles and you've driven down La Cienega, that big oil field as you go south on La Cienega toward the airport, we're just east of that.
Yeah.
And we have, it's kind of interesting, we come to this issue from a variety of perspectives, you know, obviously as homeowners that would be directly impacted. I'm speaking to you from my front porch here in front of my family's single family home. And if I have a chance later, I'll kind of walk around or at least pan the camera so folks can see what our little single family neighborhood looks like. But so obviously, you know, the idea of having a 6-unit or 10-unit complex right in the middle of a neighborhood that was designed for R1 single family residences is pretty silly. But in addition to that, my profession for the last 15 years or so has been affordable housing. So before that, I practiced law. Before that, I was an engineer with the city of LA. So I'm one of these guys that can't figure out what he wants to be when he grows up. But the bottom line is, I think I know a little bit about a lot of things to the point where I'm somewhat dangerous. And I can tell you absolutely, as Heidi already pointed out, the biggest problem that we have with SB 9, SB 10, and this overall push for forced density coming out of Sacramento is that what problem is it they're actually trying to solve? Because it's not affordable housing. Just making, you know, more housing units or upzoning or increasing density in single family communities is probably more likely going to create more expensive housing units. You have to require units to be affordable. In fact, if you read the language on SB 10, which I'm happy to do if we have a little time, you'll see that in the preamble to the bill, the author of the bill kind of craftily references affordability and affordable housing, but the text of the bill has no affordability requirement. So, you know, one has to really question what the motives of the authors are, many of whom, from what I understand, receive significant donations from folks that own a lot of real estate, Wall Street investors, what some of us call vulture capitalists that have taken advantage of the housing market crash in 2008 and now find themselves owning a lot of single family housing. So you have to really, as Heidi was saying, you have to really arm yourself with information and get educated about what's really behind this, because it's not about affordability. It's certainly not about desegregating these communities. I've heard some of my neighbors in Culver City have this big thing going now about getting rid of what's called exclusionary zoning. Well, excuse me, I'm sitting in the middle of one of the last remaining predominantly African American single family communities in Southern California, and I can absolutely tell you we don't have any issues with diversity. Everyone who buys a home here is welcome. We've got a lot of folks that are renters. We have density in some areas where it makes sense. We have no issue with any of that. In fact, there's some areas where we need affordable housing. What we have an issue with is with somebody in Sacramento trying to come over here and forcibly require us and uproot all of our local land use planning procedures and policies because they have some grand idea that that's going to be beneficial to us. It's not. And let's talk some more about that, because I look forward to getting into the details.
I've been at the forefront of a variety of battles, if you will, on the housing package and the housing legislation that's coming out of Sacramento year over year over year. And every year it's incremental. Here's what I will say. Affordable housing laws in California have not worked. Okay, they have not worked well. Our housing has not gotten more affordable. Forced density is not the answer to affordability. One don't need only look at New York or Hong Kong or Tokyo or San Francisco for that matter to realize how true that is. And many of the legislators, not all, but many of the legislators pushing this kind of a housing package, in fact, come out of Northern California, where there seems to be more of a set of acolytes, if you will, to the concept that somehow going vertical is the solution to affordability. Here's what I will say. Number one, I suppose Sacramento can continue to issue proclamations and require that the sun rise in the west and set in the east, but that's not happening. Simply dictating from on high that each city shall build, shall do this or that or the other thing without upgrading infrastructure, without providing the financial resources to build the housing, without addressing Costa-Hawkins and some of the limitations in terms of what cities can do on rent stabilization will not work to protect our population. Secondly, affordable housing by definition is by reference to average median income. So it does absolutely nothing for the folks who we have currently living on our streets, for those without income, for those who suffer from some form of mental illness or some sort of substance use disorder.
In size, like Palo Alto, we're only 22 square miles. We are about 69,000 in our population right now, and we're looking around 70,000 when we finally built it out. City of Yorba Linda is made up of rolling hills. We have very little flat land, but the most challenging part and unique part about Yorba Linda is it used to be a oil production city. So we have oil wells everywhere, making it very challenging to develop in general, to get around those state regulations. On top of that, nearly 40% of the city is actually high wildfire zone. We are quite famous from the 2008 freeway complex fire, where over 114 homes were completely destroyed. And recently, 2 years ago, the same corridor where the wildfire started came down again and damaged over 30 homes. But fortunately, this time, after a significant amount of investment by the city, only one house was completely destroyed. So we have quite a bit of challenge between, wildfire and oil wells in what we can do in terms of safely developed and house our residents, as well as safely evacuate our residents.
Of all these state mandates, like Peggy had said, it's very much top down without even recognizing how the cities all differ in their uniqueness and what is important to the residents who live there. For us, we have limited natural resources. We are right by the bay, so we're threatened by sea level rises, and that part of town we would not be able to build upon because they're just going to be overwhelmed someday by flood. Then there is also the fact that with the state mandates, the developers that come in and propose development is all for market rate housing, and we're left behind without the affordable. And when I say affordable, is the genuine affordable, which is the ones that are below market rate and they're subsidized. But we're left without those, so we're short on that. And there's just more and more market rate. We also know as a fact, as a data point also, that with every tech job that comes into a city, there is a job multiplier, which brings in 4 to 5 workers that actually work on behalf of that one tech worker. So now these 4 or 5 support work roles are going to be coming from out of town because they are of a wage. They take wages. They don't have a salary and they're lower income. So they have to come from further away. Another part is every time all these top-down governments are insistent on providing upzoning and spot zoning to each and every of these developers because they come in and they say, this is how we pencil out. Well, every time you upzone, you're increasing the price of that piece of land. And with that, you consistently are increasing. We are not going to be able to build affordable housing, genuine affordable housing, as long as that land, that piece of land is at a high price. And that's what top-down does, and that's what upzoning does. And so I believe a lot of the cities, including Peggy's town, is experiencing very much similar impacts.
That's apples and oranges. The water emergency is for real. The housing emergency is not an emergency as it's an affordable housing emergency. And the only way to handle that is to get housing prices down. But that's a subject for another day. If you don't have water, you're not going to have housing. And California right now is if they have one more dry year, then there's going to have to be some desperate measures having to be taken.
What is progress? And do the people, I think we've been on our heels as a community, as a culture, we've never quite found this empowerment of we have the right, we have the power. We have, perhaps if we could share the vision of defining what kind of progress we really do want. Yeah.
Well, we had an example of that, I think,
Yeah.
back in the days. Maybe we were working on this too, but back when people were really on fire about the environment.
Yeah.
And worked so hard to be able to bring into play something like the California Environmental Quality Act. And that was a perspective that reflected values of so many people going, how we protect air and water and the life on the planet, that is worth fighting for.
Yeah.
And so it's just shocking to me that we have legislators who are able to have, I think they've been persuaded by this false narrative, but that we have legislators who have decided it is quite all right to dismantle the environmental protections, saying that if we dismantle those protections, then we'll get affordable housing. Like, it makes no sense.
We have limited natural resources, right? And CEQA is an opportunity to examine what the impacts are to our natural environment. But also with the state mandates, when it becomes streamlined and ministerial, then you take it away from the people for them to take a look at it and for their input into what they see as impacts and how it would have an impact on them. So most of my objection to a lot of this streamlining is that it reduces transparency, and then it actually removes it from the people who are going to be mostly affected by this process that the state is pushing forward.
Previously, because of the number of oil wells in the city of Yorba Linda, streamlining CEQA will take the opportunity for us to examine what contamination and these oil wells have posed or have already contaminated. We need to know what's going on underground. So it's actually through the CEQA process as well that some of the developers been able to find oil wells that were not on the state geological maps. And that has been very troubling to have developers. If we don't have the CEQA process, how will we know that the water and the soil is not already contaminated? We need to know that in advance. In the city of Yorba Linda, we also have the wildfire corridor, as well as we have the bluebird. I guess it's considered a sanctuary. It was created, and so all those things have to be considered, and that's what CEQA does. It's more than just a nuisance or about counting cars. It's a lot more to understand how a development can possibly impact our environment and what's already in the environment that can impact the people who will live there.
Because you take down all these houses that have green space, trees, yards, and all of a sudden now there's nothing but house and concrete.
Oh, it's
Smaller and smaller, and they don't build single family homes anymore. Everything is density, townhomes, condos, or single family homes that are so packed together that there's really virtually no yard. And it's a joke. And people should have the right to say, hey, if I want to live in a dense community like that, it's okay.
Mhm.
But if I want to live in a community where I do have a yard and a tree, and I can let my kids play out in the back and not have to worry about them running out in the street in front of my house as the only place to play, I want to have that option. And the state's saying, no, that's not, you can't have that option anymore. And that's where we disagree. And there's just so much wrong with what's happening here. And
no, you're
video. Lynetta McElroy looked at Senator Weiner and said, excuse me, you're taking my equity, my wealth in my single family home and transferring it to real estate speculators who can buy my home for less because it's not yet entitled. And now all of a sudden break it up and they'll buy my house for $1.2 million and break it up into 8 or 10 parcels, each of which will cost $800,000. And that's a huge profit margin to someone who comes in and strips and flips and sells.
It's not a fair fight, Guy, and that's absolutely the point that people really need to understand. The underlying story here is about a huge, massive transfer of wealth from communities, many of which are communities of color like this one, but you're talking about a lot of moderate income and working class and lower income communities in South LA and East LA and Central California and parts of Northern California, where folks have worked hard to, get a piece of the American dream. And now all of a sudden, these folks from Wall Street and elsewhere that have realized this is a great investment and opportunity. Of course, everybody loves California and wants to live here. It would be great if we had space for everybody and space for everybody to have a single family house. But the reality is we don't. And the reality is, as we all know, we have an affordable housing crisis, not to mention a homeless crisis. Let us focus on that and be very serious about the solutions for that, and stop pitting, these young kids that are, tech millionaires that work for Google and Apple and, want a house close to Silicon Beach here in LA. I get it. I understand. I was 30 something when I bought this house in 1999. I get it. And, we need to find ways to collaborate and be smart about this and not allow people to pit, one group against the other and then go up the middle and beat us all. That's really the message with all this. That's probably an oversimplification, but hopefully that gets the point across.
But Guy, their point of view is that this will pencil out for the developers, for the people who measure quality of life and success by the profits that they're making. I mean, often for their shareholders, which might be many of us who in stock market investments are, being told that REITs, real estate investment trust, that's the place to make a lot of money. Who, I remember a stockbroker telling me that was the place to put my money to have the highest rate of return. So in some ways, we're all somewhat complicit in the dilemma that we face and the culture that we're living in, which just puts profits and penciling out above those measurements of quality that can never quite be measured. But you know it when you're happy to see a neighbor who cares about, the barking dog or the potholes in the streets or all the things that bring us together as neighbors, which is lost if current legislation keeps barreling forward as if it'll solve the sky is falling crisis of affordable housing.
Looking at affordable housing, they're just looking at, let's build out, for instance, in Marin, 14,000 units by 2030. The Bay Area, 440,000 by 2030. LA Water and Power, they're talking about 1,320,000 units. That is something that if you're in drought and you're looking for new water supplies, that's going to be a little tough to come by.
So just to say, what we're witnessing is not just a problem here in Marin County or in our 9-county Bay Area or California. What Joel Kotkin, the author of this book, is documenting is the ways in which the people with the wealth, what we learned during the Occupy movement, the 1%, that small group of people is not satisfied with owning 1% of the wealth. They want still more. And so so Senate Bills 9 and 10, how this translates to me is that they are looking at our single family lots and homes and their notion of how could this be an asset that would generate greater cash flow. Like that's how they look at our property. So split the lot into two, a duplex on each side, a couple of ADUs going 3 or 4 story high, or if it's Scott Weiner with Senate Bill 10, building 10 units. Like there's a lot of money in our single family neighborhoods. Many people are going, oh, it could never happen, in Mill Valley. Our city council would never let that happen. These laws that are passing through and have for the last couple of years, but every year they get more, the noose gets tighter around our neck, are going to soon have it be impossible. It'll be ministerial review. The developers have the keys to our community planning because there's a lot of money to be made, not just on the ground space where our houses sit, or we should say where our homes sit, because that quality of home is going to disappear, and these will be housing units, rental most likely, and it'll be all the airspace up above the ground space.
Exactly right. And so we felt that we as the locals, we are the ones on the front lines of representing the people who live in our community.
Mhm.
And we already have experienced a situation where, as a result of some of these state laws that have been passed that we didn't agree with, but we had to allow, we've had our residents complain to the city, because that's where you go when you have a problem in your city, saying, how come that guy's converting his garage into a living space, and why is there somebody now living in that 2-car garage? And we have to say, well, I'm sorry, we had to allow that because the state forced us to allow that. And it's not something we want, but the state is the one that passed the law, and really there's nothing we as a city could do about it. And we felt that was tremendously wrong. And we're the ones on the front lines that are going to take all the heat for these changes that are going to happen in our communities as a result of these state laws. And the legislators in the state are not going to hear any problem, because they'll be long gone by the time the public catches up with what's going on, because it's happening in the dark. The public is not being educated about these. They're not being given any opportunity to speak about these bills. I mean, come on, who in the public pays attention to all the details?
Are the brownouts that we have throughout the city. Our power grid is strained, and we get a loss of power on a regular basis, usually in August, but sometimes year round. We have an aging infrastructure. We have sewer lines that have never been repaired or replaced. We have sinkholes appearing in parts of the city. And the more densification you put into the residential neighborhoods that don't have the commercial capacity for the water and gas and sewer lines, the more you're going to strain the resources and really lead to much more of a breakdown in our city services.
Exactly what you're naming. The organization is called Catalysts. It's plural. There needs to be many of us acting as catalysts to a new vision that is kind of going back to, California Times, when it was inviting for everyone. I mean, I think the social equity, the diversity, that's all really important. And a part of that is that everyone should have the option, and there should be zoning that enables anybody to be working on acquiring home ownership, with that being the greatest way to build generational wealth.